Neal, Tally, and Lauren are our three linguists in tech. Neal was class of 2016. And Lauren, class of 2015.
Yep.
And our old timer, Tally, class of 2008.
Yes.
Yep. Yes. So we have actually many more students, but these three I tapped and they agreed to just come chat with us about their current jobs and their trajectories. And so I will let each of you talk more about that since I wouldn't be able to do it as well. Why don't we go in that order of most recent grad to most distant, which would mean Neal will launch us off.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. All right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Neal Digre. So as Kristen said, I graduated in 2016 with a double major in linguistics and computer science, and also a math minor just thrown in there. But yeah. So I maybe had kind of the opposite trajectory as from many of you. Is I started in computer science and then added on linguistics later, which is kind of a funny story. I had wanted to take the Tolkien's Imaginary Languages class that Dr. Ed Vida was teaching one summer, and Ling 201 was listed as a prereq for that, even though I don't think he would have cared. But so I ended up taking Ling 201 at the time, which was the introductory linguistics course. I don't know if things have been restructured since then, but so I took that class and actually got really interested in linguistics and thought it was really cool. And I've always kind of really enjoyed languages, and I'm terrible at learning them, but have really kind of enjoyed the structure of language and kind of was interested in how the similarities between language and programming languages and kind of how all that fits in. So yeah, I ended up tacking on a linguistics major, and it actually ended up giving direction to my studies in computer science. So the kind of language component led me towards natural language processing and machine learning. And so from there, I got really involved in one of the kind of machine learning labs within the computer science department under Brian Hutchinson. And from there, just kind of went all in on machine learning and natural language processing, artificial intelligence, taking as many of those classes as I could, while at the same time still really enjoying all of the linguistics coursework as well. So graduated 2016 with that double major, and then went on to the University of Edinburgh for a, hi Anne, went on to a master's program at the University of Edinburgh in informatics, focusing on machine learning. And so completed the master's program. From there, went on to an internship in informatics in Tokyo, actually. I had taken as part of the kind of linguistics language requirement, I had taken 1.5 years of Japanese. And so it kind of was like a fun experience to go to Tokyo for an internship for 6 months. And while I was there, I was applying to jobs and ended up finding a data scientist position at a company that was at the time called Rich Relevance. We have since merged with another company, and we're now called Algonomy. So that's where I still am at today. So I've been there for roughly 5 years doing data science, machine learning. A lot of our kind of natural language processing stuff is kind of my focus area. And so that's where I'm still at today. Yeah, so there's kind of a lot of different parts there, but if anybody has any questions about any of the stages or steps, or wants more details about what I'm currently working on or have worked on, happy to talk about any of that.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you. So I, as Kristen said, I graduated from Western with my bachelor's in linguistics in 2015. And while I was there, I dabbled in a few other things just to kind of, like Neal said, give my linguistic study a bit of direction. And I wiggled my way into an NLP class, which, contrary to Neal's experience, was definitely a little bit over my head, but very eye-opening. And it also kind of led me in the direction of, okay, I know I need to do industry and I need to do probably tech, because I can tell that this is growing and that I can find, even if coding isn't where I am going to be shining the most, there's definitely an intersection in linguistics and tech that I can find where it'll work for me. So that was the direction I decided to go in. And so then I went for a slightly more technical linguistics degree, not as technical as Neal's degree. I went to Trinity College Dublin for a master's in speech and language processing. And we did that. We learned about logic, waveform calculations, spectrograms, and like really deep spectral analysis, and also writing grammars, which are kind of cute, old-timey, rule-based language models, which are not super applicable anymore, but a great little insight into how language and computers kind of really interact, which was really fun. So from there, while I was writing my dissertation, I saw a job posted for linguists at LinkedIn. So I went ahead and applied there, and I'm very lucky I got in. Tech interviews can be pretty rigorous at times, and so I was very happy to make it through all four. And that's probably the biggest windfall in the path of my career. We weren't just a linguistics team, we were the first linguistics team at LinkedIn. So we got to really kind of define, where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. This was 2016, and named entity recognition was kind of where things were at. And for those in the crowd who maybe don't know named entity recognition, it's you take a piece of text and label all of your proper nouns, all of your people names, all of your place names, all of your company names, all of those sorts of things. And then we also worked on the named entity recognition that we worked on at LinkedIn enabled the all the links you see in like LinkedIn articles, where you can like click at anyone who's mentioned in the article and go to their profile, or any company, go to their profile, job searches, etc. We also worked on search engine optimization. We got crowd workers to rate search engine results based on a given query or even given user context. And then that obviously helps get our search engines working a little bit better, our results a little more relevant. And then we also worked on what's called Resume Assistant. You may have seen it if you've used Word and explored all the fun little other tiles that you can go into. That was a really crazy fun project. We worked with recruiting and hiring managers to figure out what do they really look for in a resume. That's like, here's a key indicator of this is a good resume, and here's a detractor for a resume. And again, we engaged the crowd and we got them to identify these features in like thousands of sample resumes, so that the model could identify this in live, in real time, while you're writing a resume in Word, and it can say like, you might want to change this. I don't know if it's still in active use, because shortly after that project, my contract there ended, so I had to move on. And so I found a new job at Appen. I worked there very briefly for a stint managing a slot and intent annotation project, which is essentially if you're giving a voice assistant a command like, hey, Spotify, play Baby Shark, or, call my mom on her cell phone, you would label those utterances with, this is the command, this is what they actually want you to do. And then these are all the variables that you need to take into account to do that properly. So we would label thousands of utterances for those sorts of things that the model would then integrate, train on, and be able to identify with its own incoming fresh utterances that it's never seen before. And then I moved on after that to Samsung, where I worked on their voice assistant Bixby. Again, we did slot and intent or annotation. We also did, we created a lot of training data sets. So just thousands and thousands of examples of how are different ways you could say this command? How are different ways you could ask a voice assistant to do this? And then I also moved into text to speech, which was really fun, especially for me as a person who's a big fan of phonetics and the IPA. So we did a lot of checking our voice database, which was recordings of thousands of hand-selected phrases that were chosen for their phonetic and phonemic diversity. We would make sure those are actually transcribed as they were said. So that was a lot of fun. We saved some pretty interesting mispronunciations and cute, like, Canadian English features, making it into our American English data set. And we also wrote a lot of rules about how to interpret numbers, especially like how to say numbers in certain contexts. So for example, if you have the word born in front of a 4-digit number, say 1975, not 1975, those sorts of rules. And then after a few years of doing that, I think I was there for 2.5 years, I moved back to Appen, where I now lead a portfolio of text annotation projects. So a lot of what I do is managing the project. It comes in from a client, and I think about, okay, what's it going to take to run a project like this? How hard is it going to be? What do we need to make it look like for our crowd to be able to do it? How do we need to teach them how to do it? And then we work with the client to make sure that we can do this job and create a data set that fits their needs. So we do all sorts of I do all sorts of text annotation projects. Appen does all sorts of projects. But I do text annotation projects there. We do like paraphrasing, rating, labeling, interpreting, all sorts of fun stuff like that. Yeah, and that's where I am right now. Thank you.
So that leaves me. So yeah, I'm Tally, and I feel like my story will be a little different in terms of the journey from what Neal and Lauren talked about. So when I graduated Western in 2008, I had a BA in linguistics, and I really wanted to teach other people. Like I had done about a year at Western's Writing Center, and I really enjoyed coaching and facilitating writers at the Writing Center there. And I really wanted to continue to foster like my teaching ability and to bring, I guess, awareness of linguistics to like younger people in the undergraduate space. So I had a talk with Anne and Kristen, and they both encouraged me to apply to PhD programs, because if you want to teach linguistics to undergrads, you need a PhD in a lot of cases. So after I graduated, I took about a year off to do the GREs, applied to something like 10 PhD programs, got accepted to a couple, ended up in New York at CUNY, the Graduate Center. So while I was at CUNY, I did a lot of work as like a research assistant. I was in a bunch of various labs. I was in a second language acquisition lab doing work on projects like a bilingual syntax project. We went out to schools where there were kindergartners and fifth graders that we administered many bilingual exams to just kind of capture data on the bilingual acquisition process of them. I also worked at a psycholinguistics lab, and for that, we did a lot of in-person administration of exams to kind of track how they were processing sentences and that sort of thing. And then I also did a couple of years as a student disability services assistant, where I worked with our school to proctor exams for students at our graduate center with disabilities. So did a whole variety of things. Academically, I thought I was going to focus on syntax for my PhD. Did that for a while and then really got interested in semantics, theoretical semantics. So I took kind of a left turn there and eventually wound up doing a dissertation in mixed theoretical semantics and experimental semantics. And around the same time, this whole idea of doing studies with online participants was really catching on, and like there was this big buzz about this new thing at the time called Mechanical Turk. So I actually ran my dissertation using Mechanical Turk and getting online participants. So I realize now that it's a big coincidence because like that's like kind of the annotation space and that's kind of where it started and that's where I'm continuing to be today. But so yeah, I did my dissertation in experimental and theoretical semantics, and while I was working on that for like the last year or so, I was looking for like a part-time job to make ends meet while I was writing and researching and all of that. And the program assistant sent me an email and she sent it out to the whole program, and it was for this part-time position as a linguist annotator with Appen. And I was like, oh, like the hourly rate's pretty decent. You know, it sounds interesting to work with a team of linguists in industry. You know, I'd worked with a lot of linguists before, but it had only been in an academic setting. So I applied to the job. I got it, and I ended up on a team with about 25 other linguists. And we were working actually on the same like sister project that Lauren was talking about that she was working with. So it was an intent and slot project, and I was fascinated. Like I was like, wow, like everything moves so fast here, and like you know we're tagging up the data and sending it in, and then we're kind of seeing the results like in real time. Like academia is glacial, you know, and tech is like the exact opposite. It moves very fast. So for the first time in my life, I realized, hey, like linguistics has this really cool industry application. Like that's really neat, you know, and a different side of things. So fast forward, I defended my dissertation and I was applying to postdocs, and postdocs is a brutal space, you know, it's very competitive, and I wasn't hearing anything back. And then around the same time, my lead linguist on the team I was still working with part-time reached out to me and said that he got this great opportunity and he wanted to nominate me to like kind of be his replacement as he moved on. So I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, sure, I'll apply. I'll see what happens. You know, like I thought I was gonna do a postdoc and continue on with my academic career, but this really seems like an interesting space and like maybe it'll go somewhere cool. So I applied to that position, got a full-time contract position, and I continued to be just really fascinated by like the different change of pace and seeing things like seeing results to like the work I was putting in with linguistics. And yeah, I ended up at Appen for about 3.5 years working on a variety of projects. Like I continue to work with that same client that I started as an annotator with and developed relationships with those client contacts that we had. They were also linguists, so a lot of them were PhD master's students working on the client side, and that was a really cool partnership to like work with them collectively on making their product, which was a virtual assistant, like stronger, and just like having that cool linguist partnership to like make things happen in the world. So about 3.5 years after Appen, was part of like actually a pretty big collective downsizing at the time, so a reduction in force. And that kind of came out of nowhere. And I was like, okay, well, I need to figure out what I do now. Like I thought I was going to be at Appen for a few more years. That's not going to happen. So what are my other options? So I was applying around, and at Appen, not only had I been doing linguist work, but I'd also been doing a lot of project management work. And I applied to jobs in both spaces. And I ended up getting a job doing more project management related stuff at Scale AI, which funny enough is like a direct competitor to Appen. So at Scale AI, I was continuing to work in the annotation space. Scale does work with text data, which is what I was doing at Appen, but they also do a lot of computer vision and autonomous vehicles annotation as well. So image tagging. I didn't work too much on those projects, but that was like a big part of what Scale did. I learned a lot about those projects. And at Scale, like I said, I did more program management stuff, but my title when I first started at Scale was engagement manager, which is a post-sales position. So it's somewhere between a customer success manager and a program manager. So I continue to do a lot of customer business to business relationships, fostering that relationship, really leaning into the people relation side of things with the customer while continuing to manage mostly text-based language projects. And after about a year there, I learned a lot. I met a lot of wonderful people, but it wasn't really the kind of space I wanted to be in long term. Like, I really missed working with linguists and language aware folks. And like I said, Scale did a lot of different types of annotation, and the focus wasn't necessarily text-based or language. So I started to consider, my options, apply around a little bit while still working there. And I saw some postings for Grammarly, and I'd actually known several linguists, some from Appen actually, who'd migrated over there over the years. And I reached out to some and asked them how they liked working at Grammarly. And it all sounded really good. So I interviewed there, and for whatever reason, the stars seemed to align. They were looking for someone with a very specific background. They wanted someone with annotation experience, proofreading experience, linguistics experience, operations experience, which I'd gotten at Scale. And it just all seemed to line up. So after a little while of interviewing, which, is always nerve-wracking, I ended up getting hired there. I started last July. And the work I do at Grammarly is I still work with customers, but it's actually internal customers. Grammarly has a lot of, we call them language research teams. So they work on things like the different models that Grammarly has for their product. And they do like quality checking. They run internal annotation projects. And half of my job is partnering with them to work on like the linguistic sides of things, to really make sure we're thinking about like all of the linguistic considerations of the work they're doing. And then the other half of my job is annotation, project management with like a medium-sized group of contractors, similar to what I was doing at Appen. So yeah, that my job is essentially like half like hard linguistic stuff and then half project management stuff.
All right, thank you, Tally. So we can proceed by simply opening it up for any questions, comments from the audience. What does a linguistic annotator do?
Yeah, so that can really vary on the project. And Lauren, you're going to have to help me out here. So when I've been working on linguistic annotation projects, most of them have been text-based, but they can also be audio-based, even video-based. They might be things like transcribing like speech to text, for example. So like things that are a bit more like transliteration, translation related. But like as Lauren mentioned, like with slot and intent tagging, it can be about semantic parsing, syntactic parsing, like using your knowledge of semantics and syntax to make sure you're correctly finding constituents, getting to like the overall intent of the sentence or like a phrase, that sort of thing. So I think like ground level, that's how I describe it. Am I doing it justice, Lauren?
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt. And the only other thing that I would say is a very interesting type of project. You probably wouldn't see it very often as a linguistic annotator, but it does use a lot more of your kind of linguistics know-how is like co-reference annotation. And so that's, labeling when you have a referent that refers to an anaphor and who it refers to and those sorts of things. And we have also done like relation extraction. So that's, given a sentence, Joe Biden is the president of the United States of America. And then you figure out how do these named entities, relate to one another. Joe Biden and United States of America, what is the relationship between those two entities given the sentence? That's a little bit more of a deep one. But yeah, usually it's definitely along the lines of what Tally was saying.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of projects that require linguist annotators really have to do with like the guidelines. So like a lot of these projects have guidelines that can be anywhere from a couple of pages to like many, many pages. And it can be very hard for people who are linguists or language engineers to like take this jargon that we all share as linguists and then figure out how to translate it to people who are not linguists. So I think in terms of that, it's just kind of like the people, like the audience of the guidelines. Sometimes they need to be linguists.
Other questions, either by chat or just unmute?
I got one. I got a couple, but one at a time. Hello. I graduated in 2021 with just a BA in linguistics, and I'd done some full-time work before that. And I, up until recently, was working with a nonprofit, an arts education nonprofit. And I was like, hang on, let's find some linguistic work. That's the happy place. So I'm trying to like leverage a lot of project management experience and figure out like what kind of work that could be applied to. And maybe that turns into like getting a master's in something. But like I have little-ish, a non-zero amount of like tech work experience. I once upon a time did some SEO type stuff in a very strange job at like 17. But I guess I'm like curious about, for any of y'all, like what types of projects could I like wiggle into with project management experience that turns into like working with a team of linguists or language folks. I've been looking at like some translations companies, some localization companies, like that has been a focus, but like it's kind of like I'll do anything and then see what happens from there. So what's my in?
I think the project management experience is actually really helpful. And if you play that up, that'll help, because I think at least most of what Tally and I do, or a very large proportion, is project management. And it's the knowledge, the background knowledge of linguistics that helps us do our particular jobs. I can't speak for Neal, though. It sounds like he has something to add.
Yeah, just a little bit. And like even for, I mean, just your very generic tech company, it helps if there's some sort of like language component to it, if that's especially what you're looking for. But a lot of times there are tech companies that don't even know they need a project manager for something. And so in my case, I work on a team of data scientists, and we just have kind of the project managers who go between the client and us in terms of what they want for the product that we're the service that we're providing, but they don't have that linguistic knowledge that would be super helpful in terms of or if they do, it helps to learn that for them, where where one of our projects that we're working on currently is to annotate. So I work in online retail, not at Amazon though, but online retail in we call it catalog enrichment, of taking unstructured text data and creating annotations in a way, but in an unsupervised way, where we take that text data and say, oh, for instance, like how, what condition is this on, for instance, on like a marketplace site, what condition is this laptop in? Like what brand is the laptop, if that's not already part of the labeled text data? And so there's a lot of areas where like that linguistics background helps. And so even just applying for project manager positions in that space is something to potentially look into. The other one would be maybe data analysts. Is something that it helps to have a bit of programming experience, which it sounds like you do, and being able to, well, and some database queries and analysis, and there's some really fun things that you can do in that space as well. That requires kind of the minimal coding experience, or may not even require a computer science degree.
I was going to say something very aligned to what Neal was saying. Like, if you're interested in working with linguists or working with language, you know, look at the company, look at the product. Like, if it's specifically linguists that you want to work with, there's sadly kind of few companies that have tons of linguists, right? So like Appen, Grammarly, those are two, but then there's also like Amazon, Meta. These companies do have people who are actually theoretical linguists working for them. And then there's also, of course, a lot of companies that they don't even know what a linguist is. Like, so if you're really specifically interested in working with linguists, like doing research about what those companies are will make that like a short list for you to pursue. If it's more like you want to work with language as your day-to-day and you aren't necessarily looking to work with linguists, that broaden things up quite a bit. Like, I think your strategy of looking for like work you can do with translators, transliterators is definitely a good strategy. You know, you can also look at like what is the main product that the company or startup has, like information extraction from PDFs, for example. That's language based, you know, and they would really benefit from someone with linguistics knowledge being on the team.
So great to see you all. This is really wonderful. I'm learning so much. And I just have a question. It's kind of what Jess was talking about. In a perfect world, if you could say to tech companies why this is kind of what Jess was asking, but like, why do they need you? What is the biggest gap that you see in, I don't know if tech company is even the right term, but in your line of work, like what are they lacking the most that linguists could fill that you've seen as sort of a gap? Maybe there's too many to even count, but do you understand what I'm saying?
I mean, I think to sum it up, my cynical response would be functional language models, full stop. Like, you know, a lot of these big companies, they have engineers take a first pass at creating language models, and it can get them so far, but then at a certain point, sometimes after years, they start running into problems and their models can't grow anymore because the people who have built them don't understand how language works. They understand how computers work, but they have no idea how language works.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to phrase this is probably so in kind of the area where I work, which is a lot of machine learning and natural language processing, kind of the area where where I benefit most from a linguistics degree, and this could apply to somebody coming in as a consultant or just as another team member on a data science or data analytics team, is you can train these machine learning models or these language models. And I think this is kind of along the lines of what Tally was saying as well, is like when things go wrong, they don't know how to fix it, or like where to look in terms of whether it's coming from the data or whether it's coming from is our model architecture too simple or too complex to capture these relationships that we're trying to extract from the language. And so one aspect of kind of where I actually have used my linguistics degree in my line of work, and I think I saw like a question in the chat at the same time that I'm going to try and answer, is where I have actually used linguistics is when we don't have any labeled data. So in machine learning, there's just an explosion of like a need for data and these data hungry models. And so that's where annotation can come in really handy. But let's say that the company that I'm working for doesn't want to pay to have data annotated. Then we're working from an unsupervised setting where we're just given this unstructured data and like, all right, like let's extract some stuff from this and find out what we can find without having any labels to work from. And so a first pass model that we used for that was actually, it was a pretty simple syntactic part of speech tagger. And then where I actually the linguistics came into that was actually kind of, so we have a part of speech tagger, and then now we need to actually go in and extract the phrases and kind of isolate the adjective, noun, modifiers, and adjectival phrases and extract those as the kind of result and kind of using like a heuristic model rather than relying on a machine learning model. But that having that syntactic background was super helpful in being able to kind of create that first pass model that we could then use to learn more and kind of update our predictions for that.
I would absolutely echo what both of these intelligent individuals have said. I would add that I think one other way that linguists are really kind of best placed to help in tech is identifying bias in data, especially language data. Like we are very well placed to figure out what kinds of patterns are we missing. That's a very short ad, but I think it's a really important one, especially now.
That was a question I was going to ask you about too, so I'm glad you brought that up.
I have a question if nobody else. Okay. So I graduated like just in 2021, and I'm actually working in tech at Western now. So as I've been looking more seriously at graduate programs for NLP, and just I've worked in tech for a long time, but studied linguistics, and so wanting to finally bring those together more, what would be some classes that you would recommend taking within the realm of computer science or coding to help like balance out that formal education?
Yeah, I guess I'll take this one since I probably have the most breadth in terms of computer science stuff. But I would say probably, I mean, one of the biggest things you can do is everything, even remotely kind of like tech and language related these days, is mostly machine learning. And so if you want to work in that machine learning space, there are some really good either Coursera courses or even just like videos on YouTube that you can look into and just play around with TensorFlow, or they have some really great language modeling tutorials on the TensorFlow or PyTorch websites. And so that's kind of like a starting point if you don't want to do the full like coursework route. But yeah, machine learning, introductions to Python. Python is probably one of the biggest languages used for NLP, which I'm sure you know. Yeah, it really does kind of depend on like where your interests lie, because there are so many different aspects of NLP. If it's more of the like language modeling, or if it's more in like machine translation or speech synthesis, or kind of automatic speech recognition. There are just so many different spaces that if you can have one to help narrow that down, that's really helpful. If you're wanting more of like a broad view of kind of artificial intelligence and where it has been and where it's come from, there's some really kind of fun. Like I don't know if it's still being taught, but there was an artificial intelligence class at Western that kind of goes through the history of artificial intelligence and kind of the fundamentals that have led to where we're at now. Does that answer the question? If you have other specific questions about that.
Yeah, no, that helps a lot. I don't really have specifics beyond like initial interest in that. So
Yeah.
gives me a good starting point. And yes, to answer your question, I do have access to taking courses at Western.
Okay.
So I am definitely looking into seeing what I'm able to access through like the computer science department and what options are there.
Yeah, for sure. And like for sure talk to Dr. Brian Hutchinson.
Okay.
He does
I
a
know
lot,
him.
and he's at least when I was working in his lab, he was really good about including even if you didn't have a fully computer science background, he was really awesome about including folks from other departments. There was like linguists, and we had mathematicians who were helping and working with us on different machine learning projects. And so you kind of get a flavor of the machine learning, but you can also apply your linguistics background to help kind of make sense of a lot of different challenges in that space.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
This
I think
may or may not be specific to your individual situation, Aspen, but you could also consider doing a boot camp. So I have a bunch of friends who have done various boot camps in the past, and I think there's a couple of benefits to boot camps. Like number one, they're very end goal oriented. So like you can do a boot camp to become a data scientist. Like I had a friend who did a data science boot camp, or become a software engineer or an ML engineer. And then I think the other benefit is that most boot camps do have resources to help you get placed. And then they also have like subsidized or post job placement payment strategies, because some of them are very expensive, but most of them do have like a subsidized or post placement payment option as well.
Okay, good to know. Are there any specifics that you recommend, or just a general thing to look into?
So the data scientist boot camp that my friend did, she really liked, but unfortunately they're defunct now.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah.
yeah, one thing I might add about boot camps, and one thing to be careful of as you're searching for boot camps is, unfortunately, it has kind of exploded as a space and as an industry. And it can be rather exploitative, where they'll say they're associated with a university or some well-known university, but I've had a lot of friends who have been trying to get into the tech space, and they've taken some of these boot camps, and they've said that they've still really struggled with getting placed, or they didn't find the boot camp particularly helpful. So one just word of caution there: do good research into kind of the reviews or other student experiences from those boot camps, because unfortunately it has kind of gotten to be there's so many options, and it's hard to tell which ones are actually good. In short.
I have a follow-up there about certificate programs. I mean, are those in the same category of things of boot camps? And are there any certificates that you would recommend? I mean, I would say be wary of them, because some of them will cost a lot of money. You have a certificate in data science, or I don't know what they are, and then that doesn't necessarily get you anywhere or is recognized.
I may not have a fully accurate perspective on this, but I often find that in general, the feeling around certificates is they're kind of like icing on the cake, but they're not actually of a lot of substance. Like, it's nice to be able to say you have it, but it doesn't mean necessarily a lot in practice.
Yeah, and I think it's probably just a larger problem within the tech space, is that hiring interviews have been kind of such a formulaic thing that, and it's become that we're at a disadvantage in that a lot of really great candidates who may have non-traditional backgrounds of not a BS in computer science, and they just don't get interviewed because, you know, oh, that's the minimum requirement is a BS in computer science. But I at the company that I work, we always try and you know, look at non-traditional student backgrounds from computer science, but I do know that that's not always the case. But I'm hoping that the tech space will change, and so that things like a Bachelor of Arts in linguistics, but having taken, you know, a boot camp in data science or data analytics or natural language processing or machine learning can mean just as much as a Bachelor of Science. Yeah.
I think the downside, in my opinion, of a lot of certificates is that they basically amount to a piece of paper or a line on your resume, and you don't really have something to show for it in a lot of cases. And so, because like any school could have a certificate program, an employer wouldn't necessarily know what they had to do to get that certificate. Or like if you said, oh, I took these 3 courses, that's not very helpful information to them. Whereas I think with a boot camp, you know, at least you have projects you can show them based on what you did at your boot camp. And so that's actually tangible information that you can show prospective employers.
I was gonna say, like, Jess, you're definitely on the right track. And it's very cliche, but it really is, like, a lot comes down to who you know and how your network looks. Like, I know that multiple people at Appen have been hired on because they were dedicated to a project for a long time, and the project managers like us see them all the time. We're like, we know you do good work. When we're hiring, you're the first person we go to. So definitely, you know, working those networks. Unfortunately, I know it's not the fun thing, but it really does help.
Based on like following up from Kristen's like half joke, like I actually really enjoy career coaching. Like you know, I don't know how many people would reach out, but like I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn and chat. And you know, if it's like a reasonable number of people that reach out and are like, hey, can you take a look at my resume? Like that's actually something that gives me energy and I like doing. So please do reach out.
Same for sure, especially if you're wanting to get more into technical work in the tech space, and coming from like how to best present yourself as a non-traditional kind of like CS person. I'm always happy to take a look at resumes and give some feedback on that. Yeah.
I wanted to ask if there is any overlap with like graphic design that you guys work with. I feel like it's related to language and technology and linguistics, and that's just my other field of study. So I wanted to hear if you guys have any info on that.
The only thing that I can think of is, you know, sometimes when we have to present to clients, you know, we have to make sure that our presentations are looking polished. And sometimes, at least at Appen, when we have to create jobs for our crowd to work in, there's a little bit of design that goes into that, but it's less about what's pretty and more about what works to make it a streamlined and easy process to get the data we need and to make it accessible to the most members of the crowd as we can.
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest thing in the space that I'm in, data science, is that a really big problem is we have so much data these days, but there's not, especially software engineers or even data scientists, we don't have a really good idea of how best to present that. And so if you have in the graphic space, you can do a lot in terms of like how do you present data. And I forget their name, but I was at a presentation one time where what they work on is how to present data in beautiful and interesting and intriguing ways. And I'll try and find who that might be. And if we connect on LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn, I'll definitely share that with you.
Grammarly is a very design focused company. And so in general, I feel like design permeates like different parts of our culture. So I linked in the chat this hackathon roundup of projects that Grammarly did like a quarter or so ago. And one project that I thought was really cool that might be related is this optical grammar recognition project that someone did, where they essentially laid out like Grammarly suggestions, but like as if someone was marking up a paper, that sort of thing. I'm not sure if that's related at all to what you were thinking.
This definitely looks interesting. I want to read through it. Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
all of you guys' answers.
Also, just on that design front, Tally, you reminded me, I think we have some Appen alum at Canva, and that
Yeah,
definitely seems
Simon.
very design oriented. So you could also look at Canva.
Well, I know we're almost at the end of our hour, but I have a question that I think might come up if people dig into the particular backgrounds of our sample group. So Lauren, your master's was at Trinity College Dublin, and Neal, you were at Edinburgh, right? But I don't think there's necessarily anything about those in particular. It's not like you need to go to out of the United States in order to do this. That just happens to be the case for you too. But
Yeah.
Accurate.
Yeah, for sure. And just to give an idea to other places I applied. So I looked at UW. There's a really good computational linguistics program at UW. I looked at, I think I applied to that and looked at going to there. Also, yeah, but ultimately I think it was, I just wanted to get out of the country. So that was the main factor in going there.
thanks everyone for coming. Thanks especially to Lauren, Neal, and Tally.